Good morning, everyone. Today is August 15th, 2021, and I have the pleasure of introducing Evie Lorgen today. Evie is a very special person, fantastic hypnotherapist and counselor. She began her pioneering work with alien abductees and milabs and mind control victims while she was earning her master's degree in counseling psychology in 1992. She also holds a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry and worked in the biochemistry industry for 7 years. Evie started a support group in 1994 in San Diego County, California, for experiencers and continues to consult with anomalous trauma clients worldwide today while living in Western North Carolina. She was a close associate of the late Barbara Bartholic. The love bite is misunderstood and a highly taboo aspect of the alien abduction experience. Alien engineering of human love relationships and alien manipulation of abductees' lives. So, Evie, I wanted to ask you if you could tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, where you went to school, and a little bit about yourself that led you to doing this work that you do now.
Well, I'm actually originally from California, the San Francisco Bay Area. So I grew up, gosh, I usually don't mention Hayward, but it was actually a East Bay city that I grew up in. And I actually had some UFO alien encounters as a child and in my family. And that's probably really what motivated me to learn more. And then my dad also, I think that's all, I realized it was all connected later, worked for Lockheed Martin, which is the big aerospace company in Silicon Valley, California. So he actually had interest in UFOs and actually was doing top clearance work that had to do with a lot of their secret projects, which included even monitoring aerial phenomena that may or may not be our own, which
Right,
is always going on.
right.
So I learned down the line a lot more about the ET thing. Although in the beginning, I wasn't sure what it was. I kind of grew up thinking, oh, well, maybe they're good, but there was so many amnesiac things that I just didn't really connect it, and I thought that they were dreams. And
Ah,
so what happened is like, I think as soon as Bud Hopkins came out with his book, I don't even remember the name of the first book. He had several books that came out, and then I realized,
Intruders.
oh, yeah,
Intruders.
this was years ago. Yeah, it was before Whitley Strieber, actually. And then I realized, well, my experiences are like almost exactly like that. I'm like, oh no, they're real. So that kind of got me on a quest of learning about this. And I was a biochemist. I became a biochemist. And even before that, I was a pharmacy tech to go through college, and I was a gymnast. And so I had a lot of education, but the biochemistry thing, the reason why I quit actually was because I got poisoned on a job
Ooh,
and got ill. And it was kind of an unfortunate thing because I didn't really realize the depth of how bad that could affect your health. And at the time, the company, one of the companies I worked for, they were actually trying to hide my own medical records from me when the company had to do their annual physiology thing where they have to take your blood test just so you qualify, as an employee kind of thing.
right.
And I had all these abnormal results, with my liver and this and that. And then I think that, the higher ups in the company saw it and they were like, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't show her the results. And then the secretary of the company came to me secretly and she said, I wanted to bring this to you because they didn't want me to show you. And I felt really bad, because I was really sick and I was losing weight. And I didn't know I felt like crap all the time. I thought, oh, it's just normal to be sick all the time. That's just how life is, you know?
Right.
And then I found
Yeah.
out, being poisoned, and I don't really know the nature of the poison, but I ended up changing careers after the second biochem job. And then I had moved from the San Francisco Bay Area to San Diego County. And then while in San Diego County is when I changed careers, studied Oriental medicine for about a year and a half, and then went into counseling psychology with a master's program. And so that program was out of Del Mar, California. And at the time, it was called University for Humanistic Studies. And it was a good program because they were more experiential with a humanistic perspective as opposed to the more didactic, standard American Psychological Association, really strict LCSW, clinical psychology kinds of things. So we
Mm,
got to learn a very experiential way with people like doing therapy, learning therapy. And then my focus was on family, marriage, child, and interpersonal relationships and family systems. And then from there, then I went into my own personal interest, which was, wanting to know more about the alien abduction and anomalous trauma, because it actually spans a lot of kinds of experiences. And then got extra hypnotherapy certifications, and then learned how to work with people from different modalities that really, a lot of it was alien abduction research until I wrote my book. And then I started doing therapy with a number of things. But now it seems to be more focused on what are the interpersonal relationship issues and trauma issues with people who've gone through trauma related to anomalous things like alien abductions or the mind control projects or the secret space program, or even narcissistic abuse, which is very, very popular now. It's just like springing up like weeds, right, in the
right.
therapeutic and light worker community. And it's very relevant to how people have been abused secretly, let's say in cult groups, or even certain bloodline families, which we've learned about. So that has been tremendously helpful for me in order to understand a therapeutic way of working with people who've gone through trauma and helping them, work through and integrate so that they can come to understand themselves better and have better relationships and actually get out of amnesia and what I call the blind spots that keep us from being fully aware of what's happening in our lives. And so even with the alien abduction thing and people who've gone through the secret projects, which that's a whole show, right?
Right.
The amnesia is a big part of, wow, they just don't remember what happened. They might have missing time, and they will have these anomalous things. But as we work on resolving the trauma and working even with the interpersonal relationship issues, which a lot of them are family dynamics, then you can uncover more and more memories and start to be able to heal and integrate and take back your power, and then utilize your own abilities for your own good and for the benefit of others, instead of having these abilities being basically hijacked by some of these milab handlers, for example.
Right.
And I don't know, that's maybe too complex to go into now. So that's really why I was motivated. I mean, I had experiences of my own. I wanted to understand them. And then it really wasn't until years later when I started doing a support group with James Bartley and some other colleagues who I actually went to college with, where we discovered more and more experiences that surround people who are having like UFO encounters, alien visitations, some of this MyLab, Black Op, MK Ultra, or ritual abuse things, and we just got to sharing together experiences and came up with much more of what was going on than what was being in the literature and in the, let's say, the UFO conferences at the time. So there seems to be, and this is even going on today. I think it's just part of how our society is, that they'll want to limit the definition and the narrative of a particular subject to something well circumscribed, and then pull out maybe some of the high strangeness, weird stuff that doesn't fit in with how they may want to present it on a TV show or a YouTube channel or whatever. But what we came to find out, there was a lot of different connections between things that were overlooked even by the well-known UFO and abduction researchers at the time. And so this is where the work of the late Dr. Carla Turner came in my inspiration, and Barbara Bartholic, who was actually my mentor and friend, who helped me understand really the whole, alien love bite, right? Which was how they were manipulating or setting people up in love relationships or other kinds of relationships, And this whole dynamic drama that played out as a love obsession and unrequited love and amplified emotions and synchronicities and precognitive things and the whole nine yards, which is actually written about in my Love Bite book.
Right.
So
Oh,
it,
I love that book, Evie.
yeah,
I have a bunch of questions for you.
this is the original one, and I've got notes in here, but
The stories are really good. The case studies in there are really, really good. But I want to back up just a tiny bit. I want to go back to the Lockheed Martin with you
oh,
because I have a lot of people that write to me that want to come on the show. And they don't necessarily want to come on the show, but they want to tell their story. And you know what that's like. People write to you all the time, right? I did. So I have a lot of people writing to me, and they're military brats, or they've been around Lockheed Martin and that type of a company, and they're kind of confused because they remember things, but they don't remember them.
yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about your own experience and what you've come up with for yourself, like the answers for you, what happened, you know?
It's interesting because I think each person is unique and individual, let's say from a soul spiritual standpoint, so that we could, let's say, come into our incarnation from another perspective and another level of what's our destiny, why are we here, and that might be a transcendental level and thing that we don't fully comprehend as we're living through life, right?
Yes.
So there appears to be causes and conditions and definitions of things in the real world, let's say in the five sense world, and how the government functions and how MK Ultra is and how these like alphabet soup agencies work and Lockheed Martin or whatever, that they may have a particular experience and reason for involving people in their work and in their projects. But on another level, when you do your recovery work, and this is personal and it's different, it may be different for each individual experiencer. Sometimes it's simply, worldly. They think they were involved just because it was an opportunistic involvement with a technology or working for Alphabet Soup Agency because they had access to secret technology and there were witnesses to this. And so they're under surveillance and then they might be threatened. And then sometimes they're sheep dipped into projects because of their family line. But what I learned,
Mean the children or the adults?
both. And so this is what I think. I mean, this is just for me. And then this is based on what other people have told me over the years. And it's based on what they learn over time in their own self-discovery process and their family. Okay. So, because it goes, we've learned that alien abductions and even people in these secret space programs, or, in the old days, we called it, the Montauk Project, and certain MK Ultra that involved time travel and involved more of this occult stuff and more of the alien stuff. But it tended to happen in family lines. So they're following some kind of bloodline or genetic ancestral thing because of whatever qualities these people have, or they work to genetically augment or modify over time, over several generations, to create a type of hybrid or modified, augmented line so that they could utilize them for abilities that they've kind of encouraged epigenetically or helped train them for, which we know is true like later. So
Yes.
if I just want to make a point though, because what I learned is that, okay, so my father worked for Lockheed from the time actually that I was born until he retired in the mid 80s, I think. And so I think I was always in a project because of his work, but there was always something else that preceded the Lockheed Martin involvement. Okay. And I hate to even use the term because I don't
I
saying this.
just
Let's
have
just
to
say
suggest a little
alphabet
thing here.
agency,
Part
military industrial complex, right?
part
But
of it could be access to these children, right? Just because they have the employees there. So that could be
right.
part of it. But do you
Yeah,
think there's another part of it? Like
absolutely. Yes.
without
And
the
this is what I
parents'
wanted to
knowledge,
get
for
into.
instance, or particularly with the parents' knowledge, full knowledge. So there's
Yeah.
one or the other too.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes they know and sometimes they don't fully know because they're also abductees intergenerationally. So what'll happen is, like, let's say before they even get involved with a career with, could be the FBI, could be the NASA, could be this, that, right?
Yeah,
But even before that, in their parents or their grandparents, they've already been abducted by a certain alien group.
yeah,
Okay. And then they're somehow steered into, and then this is what we realize later, right? That, oh, well, then like that marriage was a setup based on what we've observed through history. Like, whoa, that was a love bite setup. And then they got married and they had kids. And then this person was steered to work for this particular military industrial complex company because they were already abductees and wanted the
right,
children of that line. And then they took those children who were already abductees with the aliens and then sheep dipped them into another project, which was like a milab SSP thing. So
right.
they already know who you are, and then they steer you into certain organizations which yield greater access for another level of involvement. So I believe, based on what I've been told and my own history as well, that not only was my father involved with Lockheed Martin, but he became a Freemason at a particular time. And this was already when I was a kid, but he did become a Shriner. Like by the time I was a teenager, that's 32nd degree, and then he did get the
Yeah,
33rd secretly. So what I think happens in some of these high level agencies that have access to, clearance, high level clearance with the spooky UFO and whatever they're doing with the surveillance
right,
technologies,
right.
that they will hire or put people in higher levels of clearance if they're involved in the good old boy fraternal organizations that have already made initiatory vows to that spiritual hierarchy. Okay, so
Right.
that's
So that
extra
so the
level of,
vows are for the organization first and then your family, right? The organization first, then your career, then your family. So
well,
in a
actually,
way, it's like
spiritual. Well, yeah,
family,
it's
family.
both. It's both. I
Yeah,
think that they encourage their I think what they do is they would encourage their employees, because they have to do it by a referral to get involved in, let's say, this particular fraternal organization.
right.
And then they move up in the company, and then
Yeah,
they have their organization and networking that gives a greater degree of spiritual authority and permission to access the bloodline from there on out. And so that's another level, right?
right.
This is what we learned down the line, that there was like a Freemason or maybe an occult kind of connection, and then an alphabet soup agency thing, and then they ended up in these projects. But there was
Right.
sometimes an alien aspect to it that was independent of, let's say, a military or a human involvement on another level. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it is one or the
Complicated.
other. And
Yeah,
and some people are saying, oh, well, all alien abductions are really milabs by humans, and it's all really MK Ultra. And then there's people who want to like throw it in this black or white thing, but it really isn't. There really are two distinct things, and sometimes they exist together, and sometimes they exist independent of each other. And then
yeah,
sometimes they fake aliens, and I've had reports of people who literally witnessed and remembered like people in suits to make them look like alien grays or fake reptilians, and they were in this
right.
like quasi trance state where they abducted groups of people, and then they tried to make them afraid it was a reptilian, but it was like a cardboard cutout thing. So so there's different things, and there's some real and there's some that are faked. So
Right,
this is
right.
why we have to do the deep healing work, so that we discover and realize what our truth is, based on how much that we can really heal and integrate honestly without identifying with a particular narrative, you know?
Yes. Well, I'd
So,
like to read a little piece of your book, Evie. I hope you don't mind.
yes.
I really love this because I think you were very brave in writing this. You opened the first chapter of your book with an amazing statement that's rarely heard these days.
I don't remember
When
where that was.
popular culture has made abduction by aliens and human alien hybridization household words. It's pretty much accepted everywhere, I think, at least culturally, in pop
Yeah.
culture. At this point, my point of view is that I cannot say that all contact with aliens is good. That's my own point of view. So I
Well,
love that you say you don't know. I love this that you're saying, well, it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and it could be this. I love that because there's a lot of people that are so absolutely sure and ingrained that they know. And really, these are invisible forces. So it's just like the God force. Very rarely people see God, so we're all always talking about an invisible force. And I think this is true. So you say the dark and taboo topic, when fully explored, indicates that the aliens are up to no good.
yeah. Yeah,
I say this only for those readers who may think that all the aliens are here to act as our intellectual and spiritual benefactors. The truth is, we do not know. There are far too many negative reports to assume benevolence or
yeah.
simple curiosity or angelic prescience. Ascribing a positive motive to their actions is like hoping King Arthur will come down from a cloud and whisk us all away to Camelot. I just love that.
Yeah.
So go into that a little bit, Evie, and actually tell us. You wrote this book a few years ago.
Yes. This
Anything
goes
changed
back.
for you in the last few years? Have you seen or read or heard anything,
Um,
or had your own experiences that would make you change your mind on what you've said here?
well, this was over 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of it is very similar in terms of the smoke and mirror, cloak and dagger, X-file-ish ways of how things happen with people who've had, let's say, experiences that are meant to not be known publicly, or the whole truth behind it, and then they get harassed, or the MIBs show up, or they have the weird interference, and then sometimes they get visited by aliens to tell them to shut up, or then they're threatened, and all kinds of the weird interference things that we discovered, which
Yes.
would point to, well, they don't want us to know about some of these other elements, or they're playing a game to make it look like this, and maybe it's that. But I think certain things happen over time that are historically similar patterns that I noticed. And me and James Bartley actually did a show. It hadn't come out yet when we talked about this yesterday, that early in our research there, before a lot of people discovered what really happened, let's say with some screen memories, that people would have let's say they would have a missing time UFO encounter with aliens, and then they might remember a snippet of the experience that was in missing time with, let's say, oh, a dramatic healing took place with their hand, or and then these beings seemed to be benevolent, showing them how they were going to have this special destiny to be an ambassador for these ET beings in the future when these world events would occur. And then it turned out to be, a bunch of flatteries by these beings, just using it as a con job, and it turned into kind of a dark and almost demonic thing as it played out. And so this led Dr. Carla Turner and Barbara Bartholic to certainly question some of the narratives at the time, like 20 something years ago, that, oh, these are our positive space feathers. They're going to help us ascend, and they're going to take us up in these ships in the sky, for a rapturous kind of thing to save us and save us from hurting ourselves. And so that seems to be a con job with a lot of the channeling, with flatteries and future predictions that basically don't pan out. And because I've noticed people like 20 years down the road, they've died. They ended up having all these health problems or marriage problems, or was set up with one live bite after another. And then what the aliens told them in these special ambassadorship, well, just didn't happen.
Right.
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 So you have to question, well, what are some of these things that they're telling people, especially with some of the channeling things? I'm not saying all, but
Right.
some of the channeling things tend to be a con job that I think is part of a mind control thing. It could even be on a human level, but more often than not, what I found that there's this hyperdimensional or interdimensional level of manipulation and control of pretending to be ascended masters, and really they're just trying to get us to go along with a game plan that I believe is questionable, based on even like the Ted Rice case in the Love Bite and several of the cases in the Love Bite and the Dark Side of Cupid. So
Mhm.
some people say, oh, you're just being all negative, and it's not that. It's just that we need to question these things and then find a way to do our own healing work without identifying with anything, and then discover what that is. And so
I
that's
wanted
really,
to tell the audience, our audience who may not have read your book yet, it's a lovely book and people should buy it. It's a really good book. You say in a part of it, and this really hit home to me because I was one of these people. I felt like I was the only person that this had ever happened to. I didn't have community for years and years and years. I didn't have community. I always searched for community, but I'd never found abductees. I found people who wanted to be healers. You know, I've done a lot of work. I joined yoga groups. I've done a lot of work, but I didn't live in California, unfortunately, where alien abduction was actually a thing. You could study it like you did, and you could go to support groups. So what I was looking at in your book, also part of before you start telling your stories, you say, for the past decade, I have been dealing directly with the less charismatic and more damaged victims, the folks no one sees or hears about,
yeah.
especially the ones in the UFO community that have been rejected. Why were they
Yeah.
rejected? I think their stories fell on deaf ears because their experiences and reports were not in keeping with the conventional wisdom, namely that aliens are benevolent harbingers of higher consciousness. These people I see every day are abductees whose stories were judged to be too negative or just too bizarre.
Yeah. And it
So,
could be the other way
yeah,
around.
right now, everything is rosy and everything, we're all going to be saved. But then there are people that never sort of get over the post-traumatic stress, and
No.
yeah, I just wanted you to talk a little bit about them, give them a little space here.
Yeah, and I think at the time too, at the time, when I really started investigating and doing the support group, that was when we really discovered the connection between certain alien groups and military groups and the white lab coat people who were like these medical people helping aliens and humans and military in these projects. Or they would come on the tail end of, like, you would have a genuine alien encounter, and it could be any kind of alien, and then the military would show up and interrogate or then use you on ops as if they're working in conjunction with, or they're always having to find out, like, well, what happened with this person, with these aliens, because it's always like they have some kind of surveillance thing going on where they know when you have these encounters, and then they'll come on the tail end of it. So we learned those things where there were connections, as if in more of the darker elements. And I think you hear about that now more with the super soldier program, people who have come out over time, but they
Yes,
weren't talking like 20 years ago. They didn't even
right.
call it that. It was me who actually brought up the term Project Superman with the Montauk boy Andy Parrow, and then people started talking about super soldiers and
Right.
SSP and that. And it's funny, how it's expanded out into this whole thing. I'm trying to remember
Yeah,
where I'm
and
going with
people
this.
have found people are finding community in that, and they're finding each other.
Yes.
I've never been to the super soldier conferences, but I've watched some of them, and some of them feel real relief when they find another person and they
Yeah.
realize that they were in a platoon on the astral. And
Yeah. Yeah.
suddenly it's like, I remember you. We did this and we did that. And it's like, whoa,
It's amazing.
these things
Yeah.
really are happening on different levels of reality. And these people prove it all, you
Yeah,
know?
I mean, people they witness each other, and we experienced
Yeah,
this as well before we even heard about the 20 and back thing. I mean, we heard about,
right.
we knew we were doing time travel, and taking you out and putting you back 10 minutes before you left sometimes because they made a mistake, and so they could
Wow.
expand and they can go through time. But we found that, we were having joint experiences that we remembered as dreams, but like maybe one person would remember it more as kind of like a lucid dream, and then another person would be like, no, that was more real, and I came back with like wet hair because they did this thing.
Mm,
And the other one came back with marks. And then let's say of the 5 people, one or two thinks it's just a dream and doesn't have physical evidence, and then the other two have like a physical mark or some kind of evidence that something really occurred, and that we could mutually confirm each other, like we were all in this experience, like what the hell was it? It just didn't seem physical. Was it we were in this
right.
astral dimension where we pulled up into another reality, we're in our clone bodies, or what? So that
Do you
still
think
goes
that
on.
could explain deja vu? How people have deja vu, and maybe they're just maybe there's a glitch
Yeah, I
coming
mean,
back.
there's like looping, and I think there's looping of time where they're doing like resets, and some people experience these things and have greater memory of like, oh, that was a reset, they're re-looping us again with this time travel thing because they keep trying to manipulate the timeline.
Right.
So that's weird. But there's the other thing where some people's memories, like there's one in the book, John and Nadine is one of the case histories in the Love Bite, where
Mhm.
he had a memory activation occur by reading about a Bud Hopkins story of a woman named Debbie Jordan. And in her book, this is the initial book, there was alien symbols and musical tones, and the alien symbols somehow in conjunction with tones that he would hear activated the memories of the alien encounters he had with another woman that he was actually set up with. And then he met her later in life and she remembered, and it was a confirmation of a pre-bonded setup kind of situation. So sometimes people are activated, a certain event in their life will activate their memories to return, and as if maybe the aliens want them to, or it's time, or I don't know.
Evie, I also wanted to ask you a little bit, if we could go back just a moment. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your support groups, if you could kind of give us an idea, because I know a lot of your book sort of grew from that, and I wanted to get a background on that, and then tell us, you know, how when you felt that, oh boy, there's a book here, at what point and how it ran. We didn't have very many support groups here. At
Yeah.
least I never found them. I don't know if anyone else
Well,
on the panel found them, but I in Vancouver I didn't find them. I looked, um, but in California you guys were very lucky. So
I
if
mean,
you
I
could talk a little
started
bit
because
about that.
I wanted to do it because I was interested. So actually, I think
Wow,
what we had in San Diego, and if I remember at the time, there was a UFO society.
sick.
There was a San Diego UFO society that I would go to where they would have different lecture speakers. I remember people like Bill Cooper and Lisha Davidson and Dr. Carla Turner did a presentation in 1995. In fact, that was the last public one she did before she was diagnosed and could no longer do what she did because she died of cancer. But it was that, and then meeting people at the UFO lectures locally, where actually I think I dreamed about James Bartley first. So we had this pre-bonded dream connection because we're actually abductees together, where we were already knew each other before
Right.
programs, I guess. And then I remember dreaming about him, and then that I would meet him in the future, and that he wanted to do a support group. And then when I met him, I said, yeah, I saw you in this dream. And then that
Uh,
you wanted to do this support group. And you're like, yeah, I remember. And then it was like, well, then let's do a support group. And you can come to
wow.
my house. And then I think it was in Fallbrook, California, which is North San Diego County, where I just, had people over. I'd make all kinds of food. And I would just invite people that I knew from the San Diego UFO Society, or people that I would meet on the phone. And that was before the internet, right? And before it really got
Right.
started. And then so it was small groups at first, and a lot of times, I would invite, let's say, a certain number, and it would be about a third would show up. And then I also noticed that sometimes of the people who were invited, several of them they wanted to come, and then they would experience some kind of what I call alien or whatever manipulated event, which would prevent them from showing up or sharing about their experiences, or coming to get a hypnotic regression or something. And then that's how I thought, well, are the aliens like trying to prevent them from finding out the truth of their experiences? If they really are benevolent and it's this or that, why are they being like prevented from, discovering the truth? So we would just dig around and discover about each other's childhoods. And these are the things that weren't necessarily in the books or the literature, the circumscribed definition, right? We were like, oh, well, when you were in school, like, did you have this weird thing where you would be called up to do like the hearing tests or the special tests, right? Or the gifted student thing where you'd be like pulled into this group to get like a hearing test like 3 times, for example. And they'd be like, you can hear that, you can hear this. And then you would get invited to the gifted student program. And
Yes.
then like the gifted student programs, then they would like take a note of like one, this is another thing that had to do with Lockheed. And I found out later, I'm kind of skipping ahead, when Andrew Basiago, who was the one who came out with Project Pegasus, the time travel one through DARPA.
Yes.
Well, he
Yes.
had a similar childhood background in that his father worked for, I don't remember the name of the company, but I think it was
Did you know each
aerospace.
other when you were little?
Well, not when we were little, but there were private conversations, which I can't repeat because they're private conversations,
Yes.
where he remembered things that would be like, well, a joint memory of being together in a training scenario.
Wow.
And then at the time I didn't remember, and then later I did have memories. So anyway, when we get together in these support groups, we'd like, oh, well, that happened to you too, like when you were a kid, and then you had these like special things, and then would have the nighttime visitations, or when the aliens would come, or after they'd come, maybe you wouldn't remember, you'd feel sick and you wake up with Mark, and then the light bulbs would burn out, and then the batteries would blow out, and then there would be indicators that something happened.
Right.
So, and then there was another thing. What was it? Oh God, I don't remember. But it happened. It had to do with a special child school project where they're pulled up into like an assembly, like an elementary school, where they take you to learn about, well, in the future we're going to have these space programs, and that because you're a gifted student or this or that, and they would talk about these things. And it wasn't until years later, after I had done some holographic kinetics healing modalities, and it took a while, and then I had like a flashback memory of, it was almost as if it's a parallel memory stream of being involved in a project where they literally came to my elementary school and started talking about like how we would be involved in a space program. And it was, I think, related to Project Pegasus, because I'm around the same age group as Andy Basiago. Like we kind of grew up in the same, although he's an East Coast person and I'm a West Coast person. But a lot of us abductees later discovered that, well, we could be taken from wherever we're at, and then we were like in an underground base together in and out of time. It doesn't matter where you're from, then you like remember a shared joint experience where you were like at the same thing or another location on these military kind of exercises. So
Right.
we would just there's these strange things. And then aliens also, where I talked about this in the Love Bite, where we only discovered this through having conversations with each other, where we're like, oh wow, this happened, that happened. We didn't think they were connected because people weren't asking the questions. Let's say the investigators who weren't abductees, they wouldn't think to ask certain questions, right? So they wouldn't make connections between things to find out, well, this is part of the whole program. And so people who are already abductees, they were like, well, did this happen to you and that happened to you? We know what questions to ask because we've been through it and we want to know. And then we find out, well, there's a little more involved here, which is the whole of came out.
Right.
Right. And that's how
So, so that
Bartholic.
that group got you going with
Yeah.
knowing that there was more to this.
Yeah. And in fact, in our group, I mean, to go forward on this, it was Dr. Carla Turner had died in 1996, which we realized it was you know, a murder, right? Cancer, right? It was a murder cancer, but
96, you said?
January
1996?
9th, January 9th, 1996 is when she died. So we saw her in San Diego like the season before that at her last lecture. And then what she had talked about in her lecture were some of the memories that me and James were having, me and James Bartley, and that people we were talking to in the desert Southwest. So we, got together and talked about it. And then as part of this, and I didn't know this until I started experiencing this whole alien love bite, love obsession thing, where they set you up with someone, and then as soon as you meet them, you have like the deja vus and almost like an activation of a memory feeling where you know them before on a soul level, and then it activates a whole slew of alien encounters or visitations or dream experiences or milabby things that seem to get activated and happen after you meet this like love bite partner that you've been set
Right.
up with, sometimes childhood. So, and then it activates your memories and your feelings. And then you have these like telepathic connections that are and synchronicities that are beyond chance. And, the total love obsession thing. And it's kind of sad because at the time when I was experiencing this, I didn't know what it was, but I discovered through Carla Turner's work and talking to Barbara Bartholic, we would talk to her on the phone like weekly and like, oh no, I'm having this like really weird, I'm in love with this person. And then, I was dreaming about him. I had this experience and it was so real. And then I saw these alien beings and this happened and that happened. She goes, oh my gosh, honey, that's the alien love obsession. And then she had this whole thing figured out because she's been doing this for years, working with people. And then those things weren't in the published literature. They were taboo, right? And it wasn't until Dr. Carla Turner and even Bud Hopkins came out with some of the cases, but he kind of made it as if it was not as important or statistically significant in the population as it really is, that I think it is, and that Barbie
You said
thought.
2%, right? And you say
Yeah,
about
it's not
30?
like that at all. No, it's at least that, because what
Yeah.
we realize is that, if we've been taken since childhood, most of us have been taken since childhood, that all these things have involved our lives and sometimes our family members and our relationships and who we interact with. And then a lot of times we'll have joint abductions where I was just discussing this yesterday with James in the Ted Rice case, which was something Dr. Carla Turner wrote an entire book about called The Masquerade of Angels. And I just did an excerpt of his story just to demonstrate. He was kind of like a poster book representation of all these different elements which existed together, which points to a different understanding of the alien abduction phenomena, as well as the quote alien love bite. So in this particular case, I just wanted to make a point that in his childhood memory, as he discovered and uncovered the screen memories through several hypnotic regressions, right? That he, along with another girl that he knew in junior high school at the age 14, they were abducted together, taken on a ship to a local area in their neighborhood where the ship was kind of hanging out like near a schoolyard, which was like within a few miles of his home.
Yeah.
And then it was a group abduction where it wasn't just him and the love bite partner that they set him up with, which was in detail in the book, but there was at least a dozen other kids around the same age and some adults, and they were lining them up doing the same thing with like groups of people in certain locations. And so the same thing happened with another couple where they discovered later that they only lived a mile apart and they were set up as kids and they didn't even know each other as kids. And they discovered much later as adults that they ended up working for the same company. They ended up getting married to other people, and then their memories were activated, and they knew each other in joint abductions since childhood in the same location, in the same neighborhood, where they had joint abductions.
Right.
So we know that there's joint abductions taking place with groups of people, but then the ones who remember it, well, it's a fraction, right? It's only a fraction of the people involved.
But when you meet the person, it's like you've known them all your life. You meet them, you don't even know their name, and you absolutely do know them.
And
It's
then
like,
and there is
hi, what's your
I really,
name, right?
who, yeah, well, I think it's, in my case, I mean, I did so much in depth, it was a dark night of the soul thing, which really led me and it motivated me to write the book. That in my discovery, I not only knew that I knew the person in this life, but also the past life memory did emerge a few years later of having known this person and actually died with this person. And we were actually in love in the other life, where we actually had an affair with each other and were married to other partners at the time. And it seemed like an Atlantis type of place and time, where we actually died together, at the same time, where we had to do it suddenly because the islands there was too much seismic activity. And before the whole continent like went under, they had to take down certain areas to release the pressure so that the whole larger population wouldn't die. So they would have to basically take out islands. And we were on one of the islands working where they're like, okay, we have to take this one out. And we all knew we were going to die within minutes. And so at that time, we chose to, hug each other, and we died together as the inundation happened. And thousands of us died all in this event that had to take place within minutes, or the other larger continent would be destroyed. So all these things were happening at another time in Earth's history, I believe.
Right.
And it was just like one memory.
The soul carries that, right? The soul carries the sadness, the melancholy, the some kind of soul memory of what you've gone through and the loss. So
No,
I think that's why our society feels loss, and we don't know why, you know,
yes.
because of the things that we've lost in the past.
Well, I mean, some of the aliens will know also if there are karmic connections. And that was another discovery. I think it's in the Dark Side of Cupid as part of the discussion with many of the people I've spoken with over the years who've had alien encounters, missing time, and had greater degrees of lucidity and memory, where there was a group abduction, for example, where they were taken with two other men. They were actually UFO investigators. And he was taken with two of them, where all they saw was a light in the sky, like at a beach. And then they thought, oh, it's just a light in the sky, like a UFO, no big deal. But then she has the looped memories of the missing time that took place, but they could take you for several hours during a group abduction and pop you back at the moment that it happened. So all you saw was a light in the sky, and that's all you thought you saw. And there's no missing time because they take you in and out of time. And then you had the memories that flashed back, and it was as if she was allowed to remember, or because of her lucidity or whatever her soul frequency was, she had a greater lucid recall of what happened. And they actually tried to set her up with one or two of the men who were the ones that she was abducted with, and that the aliens, and I think they were tall whites in that particular incident, which the tall whites, they look like big tall grays, except they're more pale, and they have the black eyes, and they have been noted in some places in Nevada and the Southwest and other abduction experiences, like the Charles White, I believe, or Charles, whatever his name was. He wrote a whole book about them, and he made them appear as if they were benevolent. But in this particular case, it's not that they were bad, right? It's just that they had carried this conversation with this female abductee, that they were trying to basically bond them with two of the guys she was taken with. And they thought, okay, well, this one, we know you have a karmic connection with, because they could perceive the energetic tendrils between people that show there's a karmic energetic connection. So the more tendrils and karmic connections you will have with someone, the greater probability that a love bite setup would work, because you have more glue to a previous karmic connection. So the beings were actually telling her this, that they didn't call it a love bite, but they said that, if we bonded you together, it would work because you have karmic connections. And then this is considered a delicacy to us. The energies that we produce through how they catalyze and strengthen these karmic connections to activate more of a love bite, love obsession, and all those feelings that go along with that. But she didn't bite back, because she knew what they were doing. And they basically told her, well, this is the delicacy of energy for us to like feed off of. Well, like, what does a benevolent alien need to do that for?
Right.
You know what I
Well, you
mean?
mentioned in your
So,
books that you think they might be studying emotion, that
mhm.
they're creating chaos and confusion as a
Oh
way
gosh.
of studying emotion. You have mentioned that in some.
Well, I think that they figured it out by now. Like, I even had experiences where they'll put you through a number of scenarios, and we discovered this later through, let's say, a group of 5 of us were like this core group that would meet more regularly, and we were closer to one another.
Mhm.
And then they would put us in these, I don't know, astral scenarios or whatever they would be, where there would be different dramas and things that take place that would trauma bond us, or it's like they're trying to figure out what you would find sexually attractive, so that if they could set you up with them, then they're going to like put you in these scenarios and then observe how you react, or if you're attracted to them, so that they could amplify that. And
Mm.
it's like, they're doing this because you could feel them watching and doing these things, and pretty much you're like, this is not going to work. And they would try to do things so that you would have this magnetic attraction with someone, but it really wouldn't work because they weren't doing a good enough job of it, because they weren't good enough actually. So they do so many things. I mean, it's depends on what you're aware of and
Mhm.
what you're used for, you know.
Okay, well, I have a few questions about the book itself, Evie. So, in your studies that you do with people, and you work with them for years, right? Do you find that there's a later, that might make the stories a little bit different? How they come out of these things, and are they better people?
Well,
Why
some
did
of them are.
you know?
Many of the MyLab ones would sometimes they would end up having a lot of health issues from the trauma before, let's say in their early life. When people are in their 20s and 30s, sometimes even in their 40s, they're going through different relationship issues and divorces, and kind of learning about themselves, and they may wake up to that they've had these experiences, and it can create conflict in the relationship. So what I found, that if there was more unresolved trauma and interpersonal issues in your relationships, your marriages, or your family of origin, it could exacerbate the amount and negativity of certain alien beings and involvement in your life from a more mind control, manipulation, interference perspective. But as you do your healing work and you become more focused on really like a positive spiritual growth, then you don't have as many negative experiences. They can't get into your life, but they may still try, but you don't have the level of fear or the same level of powerlessness that you did before you did your healing work or your trauma resolution. So I think that certain, like my I don't have the alien things anymore. I don't experience that, although sometimes I experience positive spiritual messages and certain other things, but they're not negative per se.
Right.
But I can have, like, if I work with a client, not all clients, but some of them are connected with certain beings. And if I noticed this more in the early days as opposed to now, because I think I feel like I've upped my own protection. But in the early days when I was working with certain people, like even in the Andy Perro case, which was like he had Nazi handlers and some really nasty aliens that were trying to prevent our communication and getting his story out. And then they would come and interfere and astrally, psychically attack and make threats. And then I would have certain beings that were associated with certain abductees in my group, but they would tell me to stay away from theirs, that they claimed ownership over them, and that they would try to make threats on certain levels to stay away from them.
Right.
Sometimes those things would happen depending on the beings, or and if you get too close to certain secrets, then you're just not allowed to go
Right.
there. And like I, even before and after groups, even when I was in Southern California, in another area, sometimes before a group or after a group, there would be, oh, then the helicopters would, right? Black helicopters would come over the house. And then they would do, it's like they do this technology from the helicopters
Yeah.
where they would beam in this shit. I remember one time they beamed in this image of a gray, but I knew it was like fake. Like, so they're trying to fake an alien presence through a technology. And it was almost like a 2D black and white picture of an alien gray where it would like kind of turn like an artist rendition on a computer. And I knew it was fake,
Like a
but it was
hologram
done.
almost,
Yeah,
right?
and it was done by like, and I was hearing like these helicopters overhead. And I'm like, what the fuck are they doing? Like, this is bullshit. Like, I knew
Yeah.
that was bullshit. So
Mm.
sometimes they would trick, before the support group, then they would, they turn your phone off, right? So that people can't call you, or they'd do all the clicks on the phone and, do their little spooky games. But, I did have experiences in my home where portals would open up and beings would pop out where they were witnessed by, certain family members, and even people that I went to like a Bible study group with when I was younger, that they actually saw this one. I don't even think this was an alien. I think it was an angel, that they claimed to see an angel in broad daylight in my house walking upstairs. It was like this tall robed being with a robed, what do they call it? A ishnisha in Buddhism. It has like a little thing with like a turban thing on his head and like a white robe and like really, really tall.
Yeah.
And it would always, like, the portal was in a certain area upstairs. So sometimes I would see the portal as it was closing up. So it would be like this big circular thing that would go up and it would go like up into the ceiling, but then they would always come through that same portal.
Wow.
So it was a weird thing in that particular house. So it was as if portals could be just doorways for different kinds of beings. It's not always like a negative being. It's
That's
just like,
right.
oh, it's
Yeah.
a doorway,
Yeah. I lived in a house that had a portal, and that was the house I ended up having a Kundalini rising in.
Oh,
Later, much later, I found out that Aleister Crowley had lived in that house when he was very old and lived in Vancouver for a while.
oh,
So it
wow.
didn't surprise me that it was a spooky house,
Yeah.
Okay, well, I wanted to ask you this. When you do your research with people, especially when you started with the circles, right? Um, at what point did you know that you had a book?
Oh,
Yeah, how many rounds did you do? How many years before you realized this is absolutely has to be a book?
yeah. I think it was from 1996 until 1999. I had enough cases to do a book based on what I learned with Barbara Bartholic and the initial group.
Right.
And I only did 10 case studies. And the thing is, there's many more people who will tell me of their experiences in, counseling or just reporting their things, but maybe they only have a certain aspect of the experience and not the whole thing. So it wouldn't be representative, or they don't even want to go public. They don't want to tell it on a book. So it was actually quite
Right.
hard to even get 10 good case studies out of at least what, 50 or more,
Yes.
that you can get their permissions, and then you change their names, and you might change some of the events so that they can't be identified in order to give the flavor of a vignette of the pattern, which is the hypothesis of how this plays out. So some of them are more specific to the experience, like after, for example, after Barbara Bartholic passed away in 2011, I wrote my book, Dark Side of Cupid, where she had shared with me 3 specific cases that had more details of people where I think all those people had died and actually passed away. And then I was able to do the case study with much more details on how it happened. I still changed their names, but a lot of these people, they just don't want these details of their private lives out, because it's their love relationship and they're like married to one person, they're having a love bite with somebody else, and then maybe they had an affair, and like they just don't want to talk about it. So it's actually hard to get a number of case studies that say, this is actually something real, and I'm not making up a theory. This is showing that there's something significant here that is beyond, I think, a normal psychological explanation,
And I
which
wanted to ask you about that, Evie. There must be there must be with each person the clues, signs, symbols, symptoms that you look for in an abduction that make you realize that this is the real thing. This is true. So I wanted you to discuss a little bit about what your format is for the clues and signs and symptoms that someone has had a love bite, as opposed to just being obsessed over a neighbor.
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, there's a lot of people who don't remember the fullness of their own experience, and they could very well be an abductee having a love bite, and it's just because they're not aware, or they don't have a level of lucidity and memory to really get the whole picture. But in general, like in the Love Bite first book, it was more focused on people who definitely had, UFO sightings, maybe once or more times in their life, that may be associated with a missing time event, or where they had certain ET beings appear in their room where they were taken and missing time and woke up with body marks or implants or mutually shared memories and witnesses, so that it was beyond, just making it up. There was usually witness testimonies in the other family members. And then if they remembered being set up or a person's image imprinted in their mind, and then they would find this person later in life, and then they realized they were set up with them later, and they would have the spontaneous memory come back, which indicates, oh, well, that was a setup. And then I didn't remember it until it kind of played out, and then I remembered. So there's indicators, like they are people who tend to have multiple alien abduction events in their history and their family. Although in the Love Bite, as well as the Dark Side of Cupid, not both people involved in the dyad were necessarily both abductees who had multiple visitation histories. Sometimes the one person had more of them, and then they'd be set up with basically a non-abductee, except for the purpose of that love bite setup. And then that person wasn't abducted anymore for any other reason. It's just for that particular case. So
For people that haven't read the book and don't know exactly what the love bite is, because it's a little bit different than what we think it might be. Would you mind going through that second story, the one about the woman in New Jersey with the high level?
was that the Linda Cortile case? The Bud
Yes, I
Hopkins?
love that case. I grew up in New Jersey, so I
Oh,
love that case.
yeah,
Absolutely love it.
and
Yeah,
actually, Barbara Hopkins wrote an entire book on that case. And
and you
then
cover it very nicely too.
I,
And
I, I think I spoke with her and emailed her years ago to get maybe a little more details just on the aspect that I felt dealt with the love bite, which demonstrated that there were connections, and this one was interesting. I mean, I couldn't put everything in there because of, sometimes you can't put the whole thing in there because you have to protect people's identity. And
yes, obviously, and
so,
it was a really famous person in that one too, right?
yes, there was a VIP from another country, and I don't know if it was a Spanish-speaking South American country. I don't remember who he was, but the FBI agent, I don't know, I'm not even going to read it, but I think his name was Richard. He was the FBI agent that was sent to, I guess, investigate along with another partner who was also an FBI agent, his name was Dan, and he was like, he got obsessed with her, actually. And that was like a whole weird. Then she got abducted and kidnapped by them because she was witnessed to be floating out of this Manhattan skyscraper like window in her like nightgown, where it was literally witnessed by this VIP who apparently was driving by on business along with probably some of his security personnel. And
Yes.
then he wanted to investigate this because, like, wait a minute, what the fuck is this? And he actually was involved in abductions too. So behind the scenes, right? So this was in the case behind the scenes. What we discover is that, well, the FBI agent was an abductee as a child, and then just found his way into the FBI later in life, and then finds his way in this setup later to help reveal the story. And so you realize there's these previous connections with people, as if they're engineered to get involved with the FBI or the government position or da 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 da. So this is actually why it's connected to so much more than we can
Well, it
imagine.
seems that it's orchestrated beyond the people themselves. For
Yes.
instance, what I thought was interesting is that the woman is coming out of her window. She's being abducted by a blue beam in New Jersey, coming out of a, I don't know, fifth story window or whatever, right? Fifth story window.
I forget
In a
now.
fetal position. She's in a fetal position, and there's these two security guards and a VIP in a limousine downstairs. And they're watching the ship, the light, and the lady in a fetal position being pulled up to the ship. Well,
Yeah.
it made me think, why were they parked there? They had no business being parked there. They weren't at a light or anything. They just kind of went to the side of the road to take a break or something.
And
You
I
know,
think it was
and then
staged.
they saw it. It's like it's staged. Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
They're
it's staged
supposed
above
to
and
have that
beyond.
experience.
Yeah, above and beyond the conscious awareness of the person who's experiencing it. It's not like they're staging this, for disinformation, like, a false flag
Yeah.
or something. This is, they don't know that the depth of the involvement that this has in their life until they discover later down the road how all these things are kind of orchestrated in and out of time that show that there's much more going on with these beings with us
Mm-hmm.
that play out later. And
Yeah.
it's just amazing, really, when you think about it. It's just,
Yeah. And it goes all the way down to our friendships, the people we connect with at university, at school, who we marry. It really,
yeah,
I think it's pretty orchestrated, and I think that you're right that there is a lot of the genetic pool that they're working with.
yeah,
People tend to think now tend to think of clones and hybridization and stuff, but I think that there's some other kinds, blood
yeah,
groups like you've
yes,
mentioned in your books, and
yes,
other kinds of experiments that are being done by putting two people together. And when
yes.
they meet, it's like love at first sight.
Oh yeah,
You
oh yeah.
just feel like you've known this person forever, love at
Yeah,
first sight. Sometimes they do it so that people, for the very first time ever, will fall in love with someone of the same sex, and they've
yes,
never done that before. But it's orchestrated, and they can't help themselves. I've read so many stories that way too, right?
yeah,
And
and
yeah, and it seems like well, either they just want to see what we're doing, and somebody's writing it all down, you know,
yeah,
or we're supposed to produce certain children out of these
yeah,
people from east, west, north, south. And some most of the time it is genetic mixing. It's not two white people that they want to create more white people. It's
no,
actually very varied, and usually people who have a lot of um, cultures already, a lot of background in different cultures, right?
yeah, yeah, and
Celtic,
it's,
Native,
yeah,
Earth.
they like the Native American thing. That was actually common. Of course, that's in the US, that's the indigenous population. So they would
Mhm.
find, Celtic, Native American of different tribes, where they found that the Native Americans, even in the milabs projects, that the Native Americans had a high degree of astral power and certain kind of innate psychic abilities and connection with nature, intuitive abilities, as well as certain Celtic lines, which I think actually go back to Atlantis and Hyperborea and some of these other ancient lines, which, well, they're looking for certain, they could actually follow you. I know it's really weird, but they could follow you from earlier incarnations if you came from elsewhere. And then your frequency, they could read the frequency, and then you get incarnated in whatever lines over and over again. And then they keep abducting you from one life to another because of a certain frequency you carry.
Mm.
So, what else was good? Because I know in the Ted Rice case as well, what the aliens told him in a abduction when he was 8 years old, when he apparently got his first clone body switching out procedure kind of thing, which is totally bizarre. But they told him that they had been working with his mother and grandmother, at least 3 generations, where they were doing this switching out procedure where they're working for future generations to create probably more and more hybridized or augmented lines that they're trying to steer in a certain direction to according to whatever agendas they have.
Mm.
And in Ted Rice's case, when he discovered the level of deception in his case with respect to a number of different beings that presented themselves as in different forms, like not just reptilians and the grays and the tan
Yeah,
uniforms. There were many beings involved in one particular craft and one experience that tells you that there's many different beings who take many different forms who might be colluding together in these projects.
right,
He
right.
got angry when he realized this is the part of the thing that I felt strongly about what I found in a lot of the new age light worker communities. And I've been through, Buddhism and Advaita and yoga and Christian this and, holographic kinetics that. And, I've been through a lot of different belief systems. And one of the overarching themes that I see as part of a kind of mind controlled gaslighting procedure or controlling thing would be, well, you're really not now allowed to talk about anything negative, or you're being like spiritually retarded, and you should only really focus on the positive things. So in the Ted Rice case, and his is one of the early cases, so he would have connections with other spiritual channeler or spirit guide groups that would give him messages about healing. And then he would have, let's say, trauma things about the memory of the weird cloud, which was like a hidden trauma abduction. They would say, no, don't go there, that's too negative, just follow what your spirit guides are saying and follow through with X, Y, and Z, which was really like another manipulation of a love bite setup to steer you away from deep truth and steer you towards the narrative of the false light, which is actually
Right.
steering you away from deeper truth. So this is what happens. And I think in the early days where Barbara Bartholic was really, there are people who said very negative things about her and Collar Turner at the time, like, oh, well, there's no such things as reptilians or negative. It's all military, or it's all this, or it's all that. Well, they don't exist. Only good ETs exist. And so it's not a black and white situation.
Mhm.
And so when people badmouth you for, it's just like if you were sexually abused, all your life, and you were involved in let's say a Southern Baptist friggin' community for generations, and they just keep the stiff upper lip, and you don't talk about those experiences, but you can talk about the Bible and you could talk about this and that, but you're not allowed to tell the truth about how you really feel and what really happens. You got to keep those family secrets because you're being too negative if you talk about it. So it's
That's
the
right.
same kind of mind control program, like, well, you're really not allowed to talk about this part of the experience. You could talk about all those other parts, which make it seem like, oh, the aliens are really good and they're teaching you these languages and all these advanced physics and you have these cool things, and then behind the scenes they're like doing this weird reptilian shit. Oh, but you can't really talk about that. So what Barbie helped me realize, she would say, honey, you just got to lay it all out on the table, the good, bad, ugly, everything in between, and you try not to over identify with any element of it, but just look at everything in a way to see where the patterns repeat themselves, to see the connections between things, and make your own assessment based on, it's really the purity of who you are in your soul and the goodness that you desire that will yield you to a higher truth of realization. And then that will lead you to wherever you need to go or be to realize deeper truths and a deepening of your understanding, even of your own experience. So now later, I would say that if I have less chaos and interpersonal relationship problems, let's say like a bad marriage to a narcissist, right? So if you're conditioned through abuse, through a parent who was a narcissist, and then you were already in a milab project and had trauma, well, you're conditioned to have a relationship that's going to continue the trauma and the dissociation and the abuse and the disrespect, because that's part of the conditioning. And that exacerbates you being able to be utilized as an asset because it maintains the dissociation and the mind control and the unresolved trauma while you're in that bad marriage. Okay. So
Right.
as you heal through as whatever you can, then that starts unraveling and revealing the deeper truths of what was going on behind the scenes, even in that family system or in that marriage
Right.
that was hidden in amnesia, because your brain protects you from remembering, usually, unless it's super duper trauma and you can't like block it out. But if you're in like a shitty relationship where you really just can't talk about how you feel, you can't like really communicate, you can't like really be who you are, right? Some relationships are like that, and that's just like the norm in some cultures. Then you won't be able to heal and remember your experiences because your brain literally shuts it off. Because
Mm,
if you're not allowed to be who you are and feel what you feel and really, express yourself freely, to be
yeah.
truth of how you feel without fear of, being killed or being threatened or your kids being kidnapped or whatever, you're not going to be able to heal. You'll
Right.
stay in amnesia.
And the problem, at least now, there isn't that much of a problem with this, but the problem in the past has been that you had to hide this part of yourself.
Yes.
Otherwise, you would lose your job,
I
people
did almost, actually. I mean, I got a
are.
bad review. In fact, I was reading Communion when I was still at a biochem job years ago. And I remember I had the book on my desk, and I remember I was trying to tell my boss, who was a PhD, and I said, yeah, I've kind of had experiences like that. And then he would like keep like acting like he literally didn't hear me, right? Like, or like sometimes it's like this weird mind control thing where like they're not allowed to know or see, like in abduction experiences. This happened to me when I was a kid. Like I was abducted like probably as a 4-year-old with another neighbor in a broad daylight situation, where my mother and the mother of the other girl were talking in the backyard. And then as the craft is overhead as a giant jet, which was a screen memory, I'm trying to tell my mom, look, they're there. And I'm not scared. Like I was proud of myself, and I'm not scared because they're there. And then she was like froze in time and space, right? Where they won't answer you. They can't hear you. They can't see you. They're frozen in time and space during this abduction event. And they're not allowed to see or perceive the truth of what's happening right before your eyes. They're completely
Wow.
shielded. So some people literally can't hear you, or they think you're nuts. But in that second job, what would happen is you would have these annual reviews by your PhD boss or whatever, because I was a biochemist, and so I had a female boss at the time who was a virologist who did my annual review, and she basically gave me a bad review, and like and wrote about how like your UFO beliefs are, like affecting your job, and they weren't affecting your job. And so I did a whole rebuttal to it, a rebuttal to my review, because she was like
Yeah.
discriminating me because I was reading like that communion book. Yeah.
Right. Right.
But I quit that job later. I finally quit it, but it's like some people they're basically programmed to assume that this is all bullshit. This doesn't exist, but really it's as if they're being controlled, or they can't psychologically handle the impact of the truth. Like some people literally can't see, like when these aliens show up, and like, how some people have clairvoyant perception, right?
Yes.
And they can see things and other people can't, but sometimes something is like right there. And for example, here's another,
Unavoidable. Yeah.
we would have, let's say, 5 of us, quote, milab abductees, where we'd go to a certain person's house, for example, and there would be like a portal there or something, or some weird energy thing. And like all of us would like see this like weird energy thing or feel it, but the one who's like not the abductee, they don't see anything. They don't feel anything. They don't see anything. They were like, but the 5 of us can see the same thing. So this
Mm,
is not a delusion. This is like we can perceive something that others just don't perceive. You know?
yes.
Yeah.
So I have a couple more questions to ask you, Evie. And I wanted to know, you had said that you were going to bring us some materials, some drawings and things from a case study. Did you
Okay.
happen to bring those along?
No, I will have to pull it up on my website, and
Okay, well, let me ask you some of the questions I have while you do that. Okay. So one of the questions that I wanted to know was, what is what is the ethics? And other members have asked this before. What are the ethics of working with the case studies? So how do you do it when you say I'm your case study? You think I have a good case, right? And I'm, maybe in a gentle, vulnerable state, but you know that you have a book in this group, right?
Oh,
So
sure, sure.
how do you do it? How do you, embrace the person and put out their story? Do they want to tell their stories?
Oh,
And
yeah.
how does that work? How do the ethics around
You
that
need
work?
to get their permission
To get
to.
their permission and
Oh,
and to find out if they don't feel too raw.
no, then they would have to read it over it and say, well, can I say this? And we'll
Right.
take out that name, we'll take out this identifying thing. But what I want to show that the theory, it goes according to the theory of the dynamics of how this plays out. And I may have to change this and that. And then I did get permission so that it wasn't necessarily written like a UFO report where at 9:32 p.m. they saw a craft and then this happened. And that's like totally boring.
Right. No, everybody else writes those, right?
Relation. So I did it more like vignette style, where I can give the main theme that represents the theory and represents how it is experienced and how it happens to the best of my ability to share. So there was many things that I could not share, but that I learned so that I could put it in a discussion later that, oh, well, another person had told me this or shared that, but I'm not identifying them or anyone else, so that, you could maintain confidentiality. And it's hard to do because some of these people are like dangerous people who are still active in certain communities who are very dangerous predators. Okay. And then you can't say anything about it. It's like there's still family members who are
Wow.
alive and certain abductees, or that you just can't say certain things because those family members are still alive and you don't want to say anything. So you
Right.
can't say
Right.
anything.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah, it's
those
a
might not make it into the book then, if it's really
no,
difficult.
no, those are the private conversations that go on, behind the scenes in support groups, that where you really know, like, oh my God. And you're not going to see it on a TV show or even at a conference. Sometimes you hear it within one whistleblower's testimony, but there's a lot that they have to leave out for certain reasons that
Right.
you find out only privately over the years. And that I found frustrating, because that was one of the reasons why I even wrote, like in the early studies, even before the love bite, I helped with Dr. Roger Lear and Daryl Sims with some of the early alien implant surgeries.
Oh,
And I
yes.
interviewed several of the people before and after their implant surgeries, and then did an article on the fluorescence findings post abduction and what maybe that's about. And at the time, I thought, well, wait a minute, these things are really important. And I wanted to find a way to publish the before and after experiences of these people who've had these alien implant surgeries, because
Right.
I felt it's very important, even if it's anecdotal, even if it's um, you can't prove something, but some of the things are important enough to note.
But some of
And
them are objects, right? Some of them
yeah,
are actual.
oh yeah, yeah, like meteoric in origin. Some of them, they
Right.
showed up on X-rays. Some of them were biological that had a certain characteristic, and then later ones that I think are related to certain technologies being employed that are certain experimental medical interventions right now that
Yeah.
are connected with what they found in earlier implant studies that had to do with carbon nanotubules being found as implants that have a certain function that you can kind of figure out, right? That the aliens, or what the supposed aliens are doing, right? But some of them were actually milabs that we discovered later. And then in the work of Dr. Corrado Malanga, which I didn't even really talk about too much except in my second book. He's the Italian organic chemist who did 20 plus years of research with alien interference, visitation, abduction, and MyLabby stuff, where he did
Right.
many hypnotic regressions because it reiterated what we had discovered with the military connection, with the implants, and then with certain aliens, and how if like certain aliens would actually protect the person from military, actually. And then if you removed a certain alien this is weird because they would have implants that would be, it's very complex, but it would be an active alien memory that's like a hard drive of consciousness information of a particular alien that may include all number of things and memories. And then if the alien spirit will is removed and neutralized from that alien visitation interference, then the military would be able to come in and do their thing. So some aliens would actually protect certain people from military abductions.
Right.
And then sometimes you'd have to like remove the alien military implant first before you'd be able to do the session to clear the other alien implants that
Well,
were.
I found it really scary how they put the soul in the little black box. Like the boy sees, he sees his soul coming out of his body.
Yeah, that was a Ted Rice. Yeah, that was the Ted Rice case. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's
Pretty
more like
amazing.
in the Malanga stuff, people they would be in these cylinders, either horizontal or vertical, and then they would be placed in these containers, probably with a liquid or something, and then they would shake it up at a very high frequency. It literally like shakes out your etheric body, and then the etheric body goes from the body that's in the chamber right through some kind of interfacing way to go right into a clone body, or in some cases an alien body.
Well, Evie, I
So
have a couple more questions for you, and then we have some incredible people in the audience here. We have one member who's had 46 encounters, and he's writing a book himself, but he's had positive encounters, and he understands some of the things, that are being done in the lab. At least in my understanding, he understands them, some of the soul moving and all that stuff that, a lot of us find really scary. But I think some of the abductees, once they understand what's going on, they accept it, and they realize that they've actually volunteered for the work that they're doing on Earth today. So anyway, I just have a couple more questions for you. I wanted to know, how did writing this first book change you? Did it change your writing process? And how did it change you? Did it make you feel more confident with what you were seeing? Or did you feel attacked by the community for what you were writing?
no, I felt more empowered by it. I mean, I did get attacked. There was definitely attacks and stuff, but I felt more empowered and learned more. And then I met just all kinds of really wonderful people that really opened up much more relationships and people who could finally speak the truth instead of live a double life. So in that case, it was actually a very positive experience. So instead of like being afraid of telling the truth and being afraid of being attacked all the time, and I was able to live through it, although it did change me. I mean, in my own marriage and in my own relationships, and discovering what was at play that was actually preventing me from really stepping into my own power of who I am and how I feel and what's really been going on in my life. It helped open me up to that. And that was a whole huge process that, had that not happened, I would not be where I am today. So I think it had an overall positive effect. But when I was going through it, I mean, it was like a near-death experience of the dark night of the soul,
I was wondering if, while you were going through it, because of the nature of the work, and you knew that you were going to be writing something really different, did you ever consider writing under a synonym or something like that to protect yourself a little bit?
In the beginning, I did. And I probably should have, because later, like
I've
after
considered that myself.
I think my name has been blackballed, like from jobs and from stuff. But I later realized, well, I'm just gonna be who I am and write another book.
You
And
just gotta be who
I
you
probably
are.
should have done a pseudonym, but hey,
Yeah.
I did what I did, and it's just the way it is. So
Okay. And then there's just one more that I wanted to ask you. If you could tell the world one thing to remember about alien abduction, what would that be?
Well, to trust your gut, trust your inner feelings, that if there's something doesn't feel right, to investigate very fully and not to over identify with a narrative that would make you feel like you're in the popular opinion, or that would make you be more liked or make you feel special. To search the truth no matter what, even if it's your life or your relationship. It's like sometimes, to discover the truth is worth, not being the popular one of the group. It's not a popularity contest, I can tell you that. And you'll lose relationships, you'll lose marriages, you can lose friends, you can lose jobs. But it was worth it to me to find out the truth, because I'm not going to live a lie, and I'm not going to back down from fear and not tell the truth and had the, like rape victims with the hand over your mouth. It's like, they're going to know what happened.
I think that's absolutely beautiful, Evie, because a lot of us have had to make that choice, and you make that choice for your own survival, right?
Yeah.
You can't live a double life forever.
No.
But thank you so much for that. We went over a little bit, but it was so interesting. I'd like to open up the floor for questions.
5-minute break is cool. Washroom time.
Oh, I love your background.